Hi, I'm Mike Newell, and you're listening to Cinema Sounds and Secrets, the podcast where movie magic leaves you in bewildered awe.
Welcome to Cinema Sounds and Secrets, Saturday Matinee talking with friends. And today, we're spending time with a legendary studio executive and producer and all-round gent. God, I love spending time with this guy.
Lovely.
David Madden, your friend, David Madden.
Yes. So on this podcast today for our Saturday Matinee, David was started out as a writer, and he's segued into reading scripts in LA, became a development executive, oversaw a lot of amazing movies, which we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
During the conversation with David. He was at Paramount, then he went to Fox, then he went to Fox Television.
He did all of the Foxes.
And so he went from film for 20 years in film, and I mean making some of the great movies, glorious films, to moving into television and overseeing amazing series, and then cable, then ran a network.
And now he's doing new tech.
New tech.
Oh my God, love it.
He's just an amazing man. I mean, like some of the movies were Runaway Bride, Children of the Lesser God, Naked Gun, Untouchables, Fatal Attraction. And in TV, it's like, it's a movie like The Shield, The Americans, Burn Notice, to The Simpsons. Even. And I could go on, but that would be really boring. And I think you'd rather hear it from the man himself.
Let's hear it.
We're here with our lovely friend my lovely friend David Madden, who is now a friend of John.
Hi.
Yay. But
I'm easy.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things from the time we met, and I remember the first time was I came in to talk to you by calling Paramount, and the switchboard putting me through to your secretary, and I told her why I was writing this, wanted to do this project at my senior university, one of my projects on idea to story to screenplay to film. How does that happen? And that was the first time we met.
Wow.
And
was I polite? Was I nice? Was I good?
I guess nice enough. Here you are, years later. But yes, it was in the days where you could call the switchboard and talk to someone, and they would just kind of figure out who to send you to.
Which would not happen in 2025.
Not at all.
No.
And by the way, I think as the world has changed post-COVID, most of us now communicate by cell. So I have an assistant, but if I want somebody to reach me, I give them my cell number. I don't put them through to a studio lot. And I'm talking to you from home, and most of my work life is from home.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the same here. We can just do so much remotely with what we're doing. I remember, as my journey as a writer, and you started out as a writer.
I did.
And now, did you grow up all the way in Chicago? And did your family come to LA? Or?
Well, I was born in Chicago, lived there till I was 7, lived in Detroit till I was 12, and then my family moved to Los Angeles when I was 12.
Right. And so your dad was doing the films. Was he doing the industrials and working in that yet when he came out?
You have such a good memory. We were in Chicago, he was doing a lot of industrials for a lot of different businesses. We moved to Detroit because his biggest clients were the car companies, and he did very elaborate promotional films for them. And then he moved to LA because he wanted to break into our business. He sort of did, and he directed half a dozen films that nobody will remember, and a bunch of episodes of hour-long dramas that nobody will remember, and never ended up becoming the big star of this business that he wanted to be. So he ended his career by going back to industrials. But it always was a little bit of a conundrum that when I went into this business and started working at Hollywood studios, that the kind of studios never embraced him. But even like as a little kid, I was sort of embraced as a junior person.
Right.
It created some awkwardness.
Yeah. I would imagine because it's such a tricky. We know what a tricky business it is, and you just don't know. And I know that. But you went to UCLA for a while, right? In their graduate program.
As a grad student.
Yeah.
In a grad student, and I was still at that point thinking of myself as a writer, and I wrote my great American novel over my undergraduate graduate years, which turned out to be American and a novel and not remotely great. It was incredibly pretentious, a classic grad student novel where I threw in every literary reference I could think of and admired my own cleverness. And it was immediately rejected, as it should have been, by a bunch of different agents and publishers. And that was crushing to me in my little 22, 23-year-old ego. And then it kind of detoured my path into Hollywood.
I ended up doing what you did. I became a reader eventually. You know, it was one of my between jobs.
So can you, for those who don't know what a reader is,
yes,
because I've done that as well when I was a little intern with Poisson Rouge. I was a reader. I read scripts that came in. And what does a reader do? So
David, you can start out because you started with Sherry. Was it Sherry Lansing?
Well, I started at what used to be 20th Century Fox, and I was literally, John, to your question, literally trying to figure out something else to do because my writing life was going nowhere. And I read an article in the LA Times that said that studios had people called readers, and I was excited because I knew how to read. I'd been doing it for
Yay, reading!
So reading is basically all sorts of scripts, books, things, plays, articles come into studios and production companies, and mostly they're not read immediately by the executives to whom they're sent. They're read by, the union term is story analysts, but they're what we all call readers.
Right.
And your job is to read something, to write up a synopsis. It can be short or long, depending on how the company you're employing you wants it to be, and then your comments. And usually the goal is to write comments that the executive or the producer or whoever the thing was submitted to can turn around and use when they get back to either the writer or the representative or whoever sent them the material. And actually, I was very lucky because I ran around trying to get a job like that, and because there was nothing online, and back then you literally drove around, went to office, handed off your resume, and frequently you'd watch the assistant crumple your resume and throw it in the round pile, i.e. the trash can, in front of you while you were standing there, which was not. But after 6 months of doing that, I was just lucky and went to the right door at the right time, and somebody was on vacation and they needed somebody to fill in at Fox, and I got that job, which, by the way, was a union job because it was a studio thing. So I got paid overtime and double time at the weekends, and it was actually much more lucrative than when I actually got promoted and became an executive. I took a pay cut because that was not a union job.
Right. Yeah, because mine wasn't when I was a reader. I can't remember if it was Jane Alsobrook or through Sundance, because I'd been an intern as I got out of university. I did interning the second summer. I'm still in touch with the other 4 women. We were all in a little cabin, didn't know each other, and we stayed in touch all these years. Yeah, it's really nice. But cool. That kind of led to someone. But I did it freelance. I was a freelance reader. So I did like Orion. I did Sony. Eventually I did CBS Films when they had that, And so, a King's Road. And it's, but it's a great way to learn. It is a great way to learn. Yeah. And
I think you get to know what looks good and what sounds good. What I guess you kind of start going, actually, I'm intrigued. And very early on, I think not early on, when I first started reading, I was like, every script is great because it's a new world. Mm. And then after the first kind of 20 or 30, you go, actually, this is not that good, or this is fantastic,
Yeah. I think it was always exciting. And I think it still is when something comes in and you love reading it. And it's like, I read a Scott Frank Little Man Tate when he was sending it around. And I recommended it. And it was where he ended up getting it produced. But I don't think it was on my recommendation. But it was one of the few times you really remember the really good ones.
Yeah.
No, that's really true. And I think it also forces you to be diagnostic. I mean, when I first started doing coverage, and I would frequently write kind of crushingly negative reviews on things, and I would just amuse myself and just tear them apart. And I got chastised very quickly by my boss and said, that's not the job. The job is not to show off how clever you are in putting stuff down. The job is to be constructive. The job is to say, okay, is there something to build from? Or even if you're just sitting with the writer looking face to face, you have to start with something positive. You have to start with something good. Otherwise, it's not useful. And so I kind of learned to be constructive. I learned to say, and I learned to be able to not think of a script as an artifact that you're either saying yes or no to, but be able to say, oh, what if instead of telling the story from that character's point of view, you're telling the character from this point of view? Or what if
Right.
the scene that's right now on page 41, what if that was the first scene of the script? Or what if instead of this character dying off halfway through, what if that character ends up, and just being able to think in a plastic way, which sounds like a simple thing, but was actually kind of a fundamental thing to learn in terms of the job that I've continued to do over the last 300 years.
Well, and one of the things I always loved, you're truly creative producer and executive, and because you understand and look at how maybe the parts could go here and really see the whole, and just be very creative about it, and you understand the process, and that's one of the really, it's an amazingly great quality.
Well, you're very kind, and I'm wrong a lot.
That's okay.
But I enjoy the process, and that is part of the fun of working with writers, is just to say, well, what if that? Oh, okay, that sounded good in theory, but it's horrible in practice, and just to mess around and try to find the best version of something.
I think creative producing has got to be one of the hardest jobs out there, because listen, physical producing, being line producing, we have this much money, we have to make the day, we've got to get this much coverage, we've got to do this. Creative producing, like you just talked about, what if that scene that starts on page 41 is the beginning of the movie? It changes the outlook. That is an insight, and it's kind of intuiting into a story that might be the best way to start. That's a really difficult thing. I think the physical production it's kind of more black and white, whereas creative producing, there are so many different shades.
Yeah, and John, even as a corollary to your point, because I'm not doing it right now, but I spent a lot of time in my life being sort of both, being an on-set producer and taking things that I developed from scratch, and then being on the set every day with things. And in a way, if you actually are really inside the development process, and you really have lived through draft after draft with the writer, when you are on set and when you are trying to make your day, and you are saying, oh, I have only 3 hours left and I have 9 shots to get, I'm not going to get them. What do I do? Right. You kind of remember what's essential. You remember what's really important. Right. And you can even sometimes say to a director, hey, we don't really need that. It'd be great if it could. We don't really need that. But this other thing we desperately need, and the scene will not play without this scene. And so it is, I think, useful for a producer who has lived through the course of the development life of a project to be on set and kind of, because a director frequently can focus on the trees and you're focusing on the forest.
Yeah, got it.
Right. And there were so many wonderful films that you, in your time at Paramount and in Interscope, and with your David Madden and yours, and there's so many wonderful movies, like from Romancing the Stone to Fatal Attraction to Lady Jane, with our oddly mutual friend now, Trevor Nunn, which is great. Yes. The world is so small. So you had, you went from really the writing perspective into production perspective, and really starting to learn really how that works, so you can do it well and keep, like you just said, we can lose this, but we have to have this. So let's stay on budget, and we can get there, and we'll still have a wonderful film, and that's also a skill that you don't get until you're doing it. And was there one person or one film or something where it was the film where there was the biggest learning curve or something, where it just all came together and you started to really say, oh, I get this now, I on the production and creative and merging it? Or was it everything?
Well, on one level, it was everything. Because in some ways, you learn most on bad movies, because you see, oh, that we completely messed this up, and those are painful ways to learn. But sometimes they're the most illustrative things. But to try to actually answer your question, the movie I think of when you asked me that was a movie I worked on when I was at Paramount called Children of the Lesser God.
Randa's movie.
And Randa's movie, yes. And that was another one where I lived through a long development process. And it was a play that was very theatrical, and trying to turn it into a naturalistic drama was challenging on its own. But in terms of when you talk about production, so they started shooting the movie in a real deaf school. The story was about a kind of a relationship between a deaf student and a hearing teacher, and their romantic relationship. And so we started shooting a deaf school off the coast, in an island off New Brunswick, where we could get a lot of real deaf extras. And Marlee Matlin played the female lead of that movie, who was deaf.
Incredible.
And so at the end of day one, the line producer, who was in New Brunswick, calls me, and I'm in my office in Los Angeles. And I said, well, how'd the first day go? And he said, well, we're 3 days behind.
Oh, shit.
And I said, wait, we shot 1 day. How can we be 3 days behind? And he said, get on a plane. I said, well, it's like New Brunswick, it's far, and I've got meetings and stuff. He said, get on a plane.
Good for him.
So, okay, so I got on a plane. And there's no direct flight between LA and New Brunswick, so it was multiple. Right. It took a while to get there, but by the time I got there, it was day 3 of shooting, and I walked onto the set in the morning, and they were shooting what seemed on paper to be a very simple scene, which was Bill Hurt was in the cafeteria. It was lunchtime, and kids were running around, and he's going through and getting his food in the cafeteria, and he looks in behind the where the food is and sees the kitchen where he sees Marlee Matlin for the first time, and he notes that she is signing and therefore is a deaf person working back there, and they kind of make eye contact. Then he goes, takes his tray over and sits with people, and it's like a page-long scene. I think we thought it was probably going to take maybe half a day at most. But what we didn't reckon with was all those deaf kids and could not hear. So they could not hear action. They could not hear cut. They could not hear go over here. They could not. And there were like 100 deaf kids. And it's hard to wrangle even 100 kids who are hearing, normal kids who are not trained extras. But
I've got kids, 2 teenagers, and it's hard to wrangle them.
So it took forever just to get any shot. And after spending a little bit of time there, the line producer looked at me and said, see, this is why we're 3 days behind, because everything with deaf kids was going to take a lot longer than we expected.
Wow.
But there were times where people said, oh, well, why don't you just cast a hearing actress? And why don't you just cast hearing people? And we also knew that the authenticity of that would be massively compromised. So it kind of, the biggest lesson is, okay, that nothing is going to go the way you think it's going to go.
Right.
Things on paper look simple. Things in real life are frequently hard. I produced a movie called The Hand That Rocks the Cradle which was a thriller about a wife and a nanny who were sort of competing.
That is a terrifying film, by the way. I love that. It is brilliant. Yeah. Terrifying.
Thank you. But there are many scenes in the movie which are written as you watch the baby breastfeed. Sometimes with the mom, and sometimes with the nanny, weird as that was, but that was the story. Well, turns out that the babies knew that there was no milk in the breast. So we could write as much as we wanted, the baby. The baby would just look at that breast with no milk and say, well, you just start howling, or just start screaming. And we ended up having 9 babies that we would kind of keep rotating in, trying to get a shot.
No. God.
Because we wanted the full shot. We wanted not just to see, we wanted to make sure that you knew that was the actress, that was the real breast, and that was the real baby. And it just took forever. And we would days and days over schedule trying to get that simple thing to type of baby breastfeeds. So, and sometimes you have to say, okay, we spent so much time in this. I have to give up this. I have to give up that, because if you're being a kind of valid producer, you have to also pay attention to budget. You also have to say, I don't want the studio to rip the guts out of my thing. So what can I give up that is a compromise you can live with versus a compromise you can't live with?
Yeah, the want to haves and need to haves, right?
Right. Yes, right. So that was that was a lesson I learned all sorts of different ways, but the most vivid way in my memory was Children Must Have Gone.
Right, and yet the film, when it came together, it was astonishing. It's beautiful. You had Oscar nominations, and it's a classic, beautiful film. And
Marlee won the Academy Award. She's still the youngest actress to win the Best Actress Award.
No one's ever gonna speak for you again. Come on. How are you gonna manage? Everyone's always told me who I am, and I let them. She wants, she thinks. And most of the time they were wrong. They had no idea what I said, wanted, thought. And now they will. Well, that's all right. I'll buy that. No, I won't. How could I? Because I love you. Love has nothing to do with it? That's wonderful. Then what the hell have we been doing? Watch your hands. It's hard to avoid them. This sign. To connect. Simple. But it means so much more when I do this. Now it means to be joined in a relationship, separate but one. That's what I want. But you think for me, think for Sarah, as though there were no I. She will be with me. Quit her job, learn how to play poker, leave Oren's party. Learn how to speak. That's all you, not me. Until you let me be an I the way you are, you can never come inside my silence and know me. And I won't let myself know you. Until that time, we can't be like this, joined.
And it was just a phenomenal, creation, and it's just such a process. Yeah.
Can I mean, it is definitely in my top, definitely my top films of all time. Children of a Lesser God profoundly moved me when I saw it I think I was a teenager. I was young. I was younger than I am now.
It was 1986.
Yeah, so I was a teenager. It was like 14, 15. But when I really started getting into movies, and I think it might have been the first time I openly wept at a film,
nice.
and just I remember Boomerang Rang, and I just them dancing to that, and I just want to know that I've as an actor, we know when we're in something lovely. We know when something is gonna be great. We just talked about Scott Frank when I did Queen's Gambit. Right. I was like, this is gonna be fun, and this is gonna be a beautiful thing. But did you know when you were filming this that how moving for so many people Children of a Lesser God was? It's just one of these universal love stories of love of life as well across borders. But did you guys know how special it was going to be when you were doing it? Because with what you were just talking about, with all of these speed bumps and challenges in the road, did what was it? Did you know that you had something special?
John, it's sort of like it's like a lot of other things. There are there's certain movies I've worked on where you say, oh, this is just not working at all. I'm just going to slog through it, but it's never going to work. But most times you go through moments of euphoria, like, oh, that really, really worked. And moments of, okay, well, I guess that maybe they'll cut together. So you just go up and down and up and down and up and down, and you don't really know. And I've been really cocky about certain movies, like, oh, this is great. You put it in front of an audience, and they say, no, not great. And sometimes, like, I mean, so look, that movie with Lesser God was special as much about the experience off camera as on camera, like spending time with the kids who had this first and in most cases last brush with Hollywood and what that meant to them. And so that was really moving just for that. But, you don't really know. And once you've had a little bit of failure, and I've had a lot, once you have a little bit of failure, you always kind of are second guessing yourself as well. Will this really work? Will that really work? And that was so challenging, that movie, because Bill Hurt had to both sign his performance and act his performance, act like he was a natural signer. And he, rest in peace, not the easiest actor in the world to work with, but it's okay. But the technical part of his performance was so stunning and so like he made it look like it was simple that it was hard to know whether that would work and whether the audience would sit still for that much signing in a movie. But nobody'd seen that. But in that case, it worked.
No, it is beautiful. I met Randy years later, and we're friends now. And she is in Paris, and she comes over and stays, and we've had so many talks about these processes and having an actor like Bill who's challenging, and that he worked with her again. I think she's the only director he's worked with twice. In The Doctor.
But he was not always kind to her.
No, he wasn't kind to many people. He wasn't. He wasn't. And it's okay. Some people like that. Listen, I've been on set when I've been watching somebody act a certain way and go, how have you come this far? He had a chemistry between his face and the lens of the camera and a performance that just knocked people's socks off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen it numerous times because you've been in all the different films and the amazing series you made. But you and you went into television. I know there was an opportunity, but how did it come to you? Because you were, you had your Court Madden, you had so many films that you were doing, and you were in the groove. And when the television thing came up, was it that it was like, gosh, it'd be nice to have a change, or
sort of yes, sort of no,
or the challenge,
I think, well, I think if most people are honest about their careers, most change comes because it's forced on them, not because they elect it. And in hindsight, they say they chose it. So in my case, I had a partner named Robert Court, and we had a company together called the Court Madden Company, and we were shooting a movie, which was the last movie I really produced in an on-set way, called Save the Last Dance. And we were about halfway through the movie, and the studio was not particularly confident that the movie was going to work. And I'm saying that as nicely as I can. So our deal was coming up for renewal, and the studio decided not to renew our deal. I was in Chicago on set every day, and while we were finishing that movie, we were trying to find another deal someplace and couldn't. And so when I came home, my partner and I decided very reluctantly to go separate ways because my partner had enough money that he could really kind of wait it out and just kind of try to develop certain things and hope that they would get made as a producer. And I needed to make money. I needed a job.
Right.
And so my first inclination was try to find a feature job, producing or somewhere, but just couldn't find one. And but while I was looking, during the 80s and 90s, when I was a feature person, I just didn't really watch TV, because back then you were a feature person, you were a TV person.
Yes,
there were very different worlds.
That is right. Yes.
Yeah. But I had started watching a show called The Sopranos. And The Sopranos, which is still, I think, the best show ever been on television. But
I think so.
But it was like, holy shit, TV can do that. TV can dive that deep into character, can go that deep into relationships. And that was genuinely eye-opening. So that was a thing that was in my head. And then somebody came to me and said, oh, there's a job at Fox where they're looking for somebody to make movies for television. And Janet, you'll appreciate this. I didn't really understand that TV movies were this like little offshoot that
niche,
many people didn't care about. But I just thought, oh well, small movies, and at the time there were 3 Fox networks, Fox itself, FX, and what was then the Fox Family Channel. And I was supposed to make movies for those 3 channels. So it's like, okay, that seems interesting. Each place was going to make 6 to 8 movies a year. I'll work on 20 movies. Isn't that great? And then very quickly, after I took the job, the Fox Family Channel disappeared, became ABC Family, became Freeform, became Now Nothing. The FBC got quickly out of the movie business. FX made a little trickle of movies, but like 1 or 2 years. So then we started trying to branch out, making other movies, which is where you and I worked together. So then I was doing movies for television for a while until that business kind of collapsed around 2003, 4, 5, somewhere in there, because the economics didn't make any sense after a while. And then I segued into series. Right.
They were just fantastic series, and it was, again, I think once The Sopranos happened, you could just suddenly do The Americans or
The Americans.
I mean, you've just done so many. It's and was there what was the first series you did then that was your going to?
So I was at this company called Fox TV Studios, part of Fox, and my job, as I said, was working on TV movies. And we did a lot of unscripted things in the early days of FX and various other places. But there was a line item in our budget for scripted series development. And just somebody stuck it in there, just in case we decided to do it. Right. But there was nobody who was working on scripted series development. There was no executive who had that as their province. And we were in a budget meeting one day, and somebody pointed out, hey, there's this $200,000, I'm making up that number, that hadn't been spent on scripted series development. And the fiscal year was going to end in X number of days. And if you know anything about big companies, if there's a money that you didn't spend in this one year, it's not going to be there the next year. So we said, we got to spend this money on something. What can we do? And a woman named Marnie Hochman, who worked there at the time, said, there's this writer coming in named Sean Ryan, and he's got some pitch. I think it's kind of like a hybrid scripted, unscripted thing. He's going to come in and pitch me. And I said, well, do that.
Quick.
Right.
So he pitched some hybrid thing, and Marnie bought it, and great, it's in development, and Marnie was sort of working on it, but really Marnie was doing unscripted things. And Sean quickly noticed, oh, nobody's paying attention to me. Nobody's actually paying attention to what I'm going to write. So instead of writing the scripted thing that he was supposed to do, he wrote The Shield, which is actually called the barn back then.
Lord.
So he turns in The Shield, and nobody really knows. Well, everybody reads it. It's really good, but what do we do with it? And so someone said, okay, well, I guess we should send it to HBO because that's where they're doing all these things. And so somebody was trying to get HBO on the phone, but while phone tag was happening, a guy named Kevin Riley took over at FX, and he does a press release and says, FX, we're now the new home of edgy drama. We want bold, edgy drama. And we say, oh, we have a bold, edgy drama.
Hello.
So again, they sent him The Shield. He liked it. It got a pilot order. It got a series order. And year one, Michael Chiklis won the Emmy for Best Actor.
Yeah.
So
Crazy.
That's how that happened.
That's the proper Hollywood story. That is insane.
That's a great Hollywood story.
It's a good story.
Yeah, it is a good story.
I ended up getting involved in taking over the show in the second season, and worked on it for, we did 7 seasons of that show, and it was, one of the landmark basic cable dramas of that early era, early 2000s.
And then there was Burn Notice, right? You had Burn Notice and
Burn Notice, yep.
And The Americans.
Which kept Burn Notice, White Collar, a show called The Killing, which was kind of arguably the one of the first kind of serialized detective things. And
right. And were you also involved with The Simpsons?
I was at Fox TV Studios for a while until 2014, and we did all the cable dramas that we just were talking about. And then I went to the broadcast network. So when I was there for 3 years at Fox, and was responsible for all the programming, scripted, unscripted, drama, comment, and animation. To say I was involved with The Simpsons, which I think was on season 28 or something like that at the time, I don't think I watched it, but to say I really had influenced that show in any way, shape, or form would be hubris I'm not even capable of.
Well, you are a better man than so many people I know. Even if they just kind of brought a coffee or tea and they'd be like, yeah, I worked on The Simpsons,
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah.
Right. And was it a similar process then when you went over to AMC? Because that's, that they had so many good series, at that point.
Well, AMC, everything I worked on AMC I actually genuinely worked on, even like The Walking Dead, which was obviously back then,
one of my favorite series of all time. I have the graphic novels over here on my lab.
Oh,
nice. I loved it.
Well, but it was that show always had a turbulent life. It was always kind of trying to reinvent itself, and it hit a certain peak, which John, you'll remember, where it was rising. Yeah. And just before I got there, the producers on the show decided to kill Glenn and decided to kill Stephen Ewan.
It was unbelievable.
Well, the ratings just plummeted after that happened. The audience was so angry that Glenn got killed, and it was still doing well by the standards of any other show, but we were struggling to recover from that because there were just people who said, "Oh, I'm checked out. I'm not going back to the show."
Here's the thing, and this is fanboy talking. It happened in the graphic novel. In fact, Glenn was around for a lot longer. I mean, big than in the book, and the governor was the governor. What I thought would be, because I'm actually a very good friend of David Morrissey's. He did a brilliant job as the governor, but I thought it was done beautifully. The death of those boys, but it was brutal, and it came earlier than I thought it would. Yeah. I honestly, and I can understand how it went.
But I'm a man of my word. First impressions are important. I need you to know me. So, back to it.
You still there? I just don't know. It seems like you're trying to speak, but you just took a hell of a hit. I just popped your skull so hard, your eyeball just popped out. And it is gross as shit. God, I'll find you.
And just Stephen Ewan was so lovable and
Yes.
still is a magnificent actor. And I think it was just very hard for the audience. So that was the show that was always like trying to figure to kind of reinvent itself and rise from the ashes every now and then. Well, but on the other side, I quote got to work on Better Call Saul, and I came into that show in season 3. But Peter Gould and Vince Gilligan, who created and showran that, are really so effing brilliant, and that really, at the very most, I would say I would do in terms of offering notes were, oh, I didn't really understand this, and I didn't really understand that, and usually the answer was, well, you will understand it at a later, which was exactly right, and one of the most fun things I did before I left was snuck away and went to Albuquerque for a couple of days to watch Vince Gilligan direct. And he is just such a brilliant mind, brilliant director, brilliant writer, kind, sweet. For a guy who's done 2 of the darkest shows on television, couldn't be a nicer, a lovely Southern gentleman.
Right.
You would think he would be like serving mint juleps at the plantation, not writing shows about psychopaths. But that show was, quote, easy to work on, because it was really just trying to give them the latitude to do what they did. And some shows are difficult and don't end up working.
You talk about going on set, and as you know, as an actor, when the producer comes on set, it's a different vibe. But as you creative producer and also like running the things as well, what were those set visits like for you? Like going in and seeing what was being done. You know, did you have to tread carefully, or was it like welcome with open arms? Or just what were your set visits like?
John, that's a really good question. I mean, going to Better Call Saul was easy because it was already a celebrated show, and nobody had any fear of anything I was going to do there. But frequently, like especially in a first year show, which is always under a tighter microscope, it's awkward for a network executive or a studio executive to come to the set because everybody kind of knows they're being graded, and everybody kind of wants you to think that, oh, this is a wonderful set and everybody's kind of happy. Usually I try to spend as little time on set as a network person as possible, because I know I'm not really helping. When I've been in a studio role, which is a little closer to production, a little closer to kind of the ins and outs of the creative process, I spent sometimes a little more time on set. But there is sort of mom and dad are in the room. What does that mean?
Right.
And people are on kind of artificial behavior, and it's not always productive. And you can go on sets now. I mean, in the job I'm doing now, I don't really go on set much anymore. But when you see 4 or 5 network executives hanging around, and they're breathing down the director's neck or somebody's neck and saying, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? That's usually a moment where actors feel like who am I supposed to listen to? Right. And they start to feel nervous. And the worst thing you can do is make actors feel insecure about the authority of the director. And actors are very aware of what on-set dynamics are. So, I think that when it comes to on-set presence, usually less is really, really, really more.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think like someone like Vince Gilligan, who's so good on a set, it's also like respecting and understanding, the process of the writer, the actors. These are the artists who are really creating this process and this piece. It's really, how do you facilitate them as an executive with not outthinking you're more important than the talent? Does that happen? Sometimes you see people who are more like, I'm running this show really, so do what I say. Or
well, it's Vince has a certain style, which some directors have, but he did it really well. Where like an actor would do a take, Vince would at the end of the take, Vince would go up to the actor, and I wish I could do the imitation, and I can't do accents, but he would basically say, would gush, that was so brilliant. You were so and I love you said this and that, and he'd go on for a couple of minutes and detailing with everything he liked. And he'd say, well, let's just do one more. And he'd go back to his seat. And just before action, he'd say, oh, and by the way, just try this other thing.
Right.
And this other thing would be like a whole 180 degree from what the actor did the previous take.
Right.
But it was a very Columbo kind of move. It was like,
right.
just
Yes.
as
Oh,
just to
yes.
the very last possible, just this little thing. And it would invariably open up something else.
Yeah.
But
That's
he,
beautiful.
I mean, like in so many different parts of life, the compliment sandwich is everything,
Yeah.
like
Right.
compliment, stick in the thing,
Yeah.
then
Yes.
compliment. And that's how, most of us human beings can absorb a note of whatever
Yes,
kind
of
it is.
course.
Like, and the directors who have kind of shown their pomposity are almost invariably the directors who don't work anymore. Because I think that balance of projecting some level of humility and like the actors are the one doing the work and the cameraman and the versus the directors who are like, this is all me, this is all
Right.
those are very different impacts in a set.
Yeah.
And directors have to have ego because you are doing that job.
Right.
You are the person who is guiding. But there's a difference between having that ego and projecting it into every conversation.
Yeah. I mean, once a line producer friend said the best directors are benevolent generals. They come in, but they really love their army, and we all come together and we've got a mission. And you've directed twice. You directed twice. You did the two films,
did.
right? You wrote one as well. You wrote it as well.
And I did a really, really bad job in both times. And that is why I am not directing anymore. I had just come off producing this movie I mentioned a minute ago, The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, which was a big success. And in that moment of arrogance, I thought, well, maybe I could do that. And so I wrote and directed one, which I committed the cardinal sin number one of the entertainment business, which is I put up my own money. And did that movie, and it's sold to Lifetime and aired as if it were a Lifetime movie. But I'll be kind to myself and say it was a deeply, deeply flawed movie. And then the second one I did not write, which was a thriller with Linda Hamilton and Jim Belushi. What I learned about myself is that there were certain things I kind of knew how to do on a set as a director, but I did not have an eye. And that eye that a great director has of seeing a scene, seeing the world in a way that is unique to her or him. Yeah. And that really is their unique way of telling a story. Wow. And that was just a thing I didn't have. The things that I saw in my head did not turn out the way I thought they would. I just learned. I'm glad I did it because it was a learning experience. And I think it made me a better producer for having directed. Yeah. But I just learned that was not my skill set.
Yeah.
It went the way I went.
It takes a lot of cojones to make a feature film. Not many people can say they've done it. So
go and do it
well
and
done.
Take it on.
Exactly.
And it's interesting because I have the interns on the podcast, and they help with the editing, research, and whatever. And I'm always talking to them, and I say to them, especially those who say, "Oh, I want to direct or make movies." I said, "Have you ever taken an acting class?" And like, what? I go, "Well, if you don't actually understand what's going on in that process, you're not going to be a very good director because you have to understand that." And have you ever done any photography? And so I talked to them about do some of these things that you're going to need because it really, really, really helps you. And I've done it all because I started out in the mailroom at Warner's. That was my job. But I would go sit in the sound and I would watch them record, scores, and I'd sit on an ADR and I got to watch a lot of really great people work because the sound guys liked me and I really wanted to learn. But that's the kind of stuff that really gives you, going and directing and writing, it just gives you just a much deeper connection to the whole process and understanding. So
I agree.
I agree. And you did it. I mean, it's exciting. It's good. And now you're with Wattpad, which is a whole different new experience. And what's that like to be in this like new arena of things and how they're getting made?
It's really different. Before this, I did a producer working with Greg Berlanti, running the TV side of his company, and that came to an end. And I was trying to figure out something else to do. And I was looking around for more traditional things, and there wasn't anything at the moment. And I was thinking, and so I started negotiating a pod deal for myself, like a producing deal for myself at a TV studio. But I was like, I don't want to do this. I'm old. I'm going to start my own company. I would try to find things. All anybody wants is IP.
Yeah.
Which when I started was not even nobody said that phrase IP, but that's all anybody wants. And how am I going to get it? And what am I going to sell anybody? So I'm negotiating, but my lawyer is. I'm ducking his calls because I don't want to close the deal. And I get a call from a headhunter, an executive recruiter, and who I knew, and he says to me, "Have you ever heard of Wattpad Webtoon Studios?" And I said to him, "Well, I know the third word. I don't know those other two words you said. What do they mean?" And he said, "No, it's this tech company that has all this IP, all this stuff, and you should meet them. They're nice people." And I said, "Okay, I'll meet anybody, sure." So I met them, and the headhunter was right. They were very, very nice. And because it's a tech company, one meeting turns into 9 meetings, and you meet everybody's cousin, or dry cleaner, or whoever. But everybody seemed nice. So I started. This was 2.5 years ago, and I won't give you the whole spiel of the company because it would take a whole other podcast to go through it. But basically, it's two different platforms:
Right.
Wattpad and Webtoon. Wattpad is online novels, and basically any human being can put their story on Wattpad. It's what they call user generated. So it's free to read, free to write. There's somewhere in between 50 and 60 million stories on Wattpad, 55 languages on Wattpad. Every country in the world is on Wattpad.
Oh my God.
And it's all very algorithmic in a kind of a Netflixy way where every story is very heavily tagged. So you go and look for any kind of story, any genre or subgenre, and the algorithm points you to the most successful stories in that genre. And so that's how kind of reads get accumulated, which reads means kind of a fan base, right. and that's how we kind of know what the most meaningful stories are on Wattpad. Webtoon is based in Korea. It's online graphic novels and comics in it's the biggest platform for that in the world. There are 90 million average monthly users on Wattpad, 85 million on Webtoon. So between the two, we're reaching about 175 million people regularly. Webtoon is built for the phone. Really, it's vertical scrolling.
Right.
You do that.
Nice.
You can't if you just gotta scroll down and read the thing. You put a chapter on it once a week. So these two companies both have a lot of IP in different ways. They started as separate companies, but the companies merged about 4 years ago.
Wow.
Webtoon actually had deeper pockets, so they bought Wattpad. So I and my team, and there's 9 of us who are in LA, basically look for things that are on either platform that we think could be movies or shows, live action, animation, et cetera. It's actually a very global job. We're making, I think, 7 shows right now in Southeast Asia, mostly in Indonesia, in the Philippines. I have a person in Manila. I have a person in Jakarta. I never thought I'd ever say I have a person in Jakarta.
Hey.
It's an interesting phrase.
It's very interesting.
And we made 3 movies in Spain last year, and another one we're about to make. I have a person in Madrid, and we have a movie starting in Italy. Another one we're going to do in Germany this year. And then in the U.S., we just we have very deliberately no overall deal anywhere. We just try to sell things to different places and partner up with different people depending on what the material speaks to. And so we have a lot of things we're developing and set up various places, and it's been fun because it's working on material that comes from people who don't necessarily know the rules of Hollywood, don't know what you're supposed to write in order to sell things. So they write these wacky things, much of which is not necessarily great, but some of it is actually kind of great. And then a lot of it's like, oh, I've never seen that before or heard this idea before, which if you're 103, which is how old I am, you feel like you've heard every idea and see it in everything that's ever come down the pike. But I feel like I see a lot of things that feel genuinely different, and that's been really fun.
This is amazing because it almost feels like, David, you've come full circle from your time as doing coverage and a reader to discovering things on different platforms. It's reading, and reading new things and new ways and going, discovering something different that you would have done when you were reading.
I love that, John. I may steal that line. No,
go ahead.
I think that's true, and really for anybody who does any version of this job, that's most of it is being able to read something or listen to something and say that's viscerally, emotionally, it means something to me.
Compelling. Well, it's storytelling. It's storytelling.
Yeah. And that's all. That's all any of us do is try to help facilitate storytelling in the best way it can and get it to the most people we can get it to.
Right. No, it's so true. Well, I'm going to be checking out more things on Wattpad. I've been on it, but
definitely. I'm intrigued now.
And so, well, I did want to ask you, in your life as a film lover, do you have a favorite film or a couple of favorite films that are either films that when you were a kid you just loved, and it's like, I want to be in films, do films, I love films, or just is one of those films that always sticks with you, like one of the...
Well, I mean, I think all of us would probably say, it's hard to isolate one movie. You love movies for different reasons, for different things.
Sure.
But the answer I would give you, which will sound a little pretentious, but it's sort of where my mind always goes. When I was in college, I had a friend who was a big film lover. His name was Klaus von Sydow, and he's the son of Max von Sydow, the actor.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes, of course.
In my Bergman films. And he turned me on to a movie that I've seen more than I've seen any other individual movie, called Children of Paradise. Children of Paradise is a...
Oh, I love that film.
You know what it is. Okay. Okay. So for anybody who doesn't know, it's a French movie from the early 1940s, made during World War II, but about late 19th century France. And it's, to me, the most romantic movie ever made. It's basically about a woman who is being courted by three very, very, very different men.
It's beautiful.
And it every time I've watched it, it's made me cry. And I've tried to show it to my wife and my daughter, and they look at me like, "This is so boring. Why?"
It's so good.
And I love Casablanca, and I love the two Godfather movies, and I love Annie Hall. All sorts of movies for other reasons, but Children of Paradise has a special little place for me.
Is the French title, is it Enfants du Paradis? Is it something like that?
Les Enfants du Paradis. Yeah.
Les Enfants du Paradis.
Yeah.
Oh, it is. It's a beautiful film. I love that movie, and I love Casablanca. How can you not love Casablanca? I mean,
if anybody says they don't like Casablanca, they could leave my house immediately.
Well, David, thank you. I know you have a full day ahead, but
thank you so
this has been
much for the
so
time.
much fun and so nice. It's so nice to see you, and you have to get over to London.
Yeah,
you have to come.
I would love that. Janet, really good to see you. See you, John. Really good. John, good to meet you. Thank you. Thank you for all the good questions. I really appreciate it.
Cinema Sounds and Secrets is a production of CSS Sounds. Original music by the composer and pianist Merv DePere. Sumptuous sound editing by Sam Boulier. Graphic design by Paul Koulos. Right-hand help from our super efficient production coordinator and webmaster Isabel Roig. Social media, Scarlett Mosher, and our amazing team of production intern research assistants, Tara Lindenbaum, Dexter Blanchard, Jose Arroyo, Caitlin McAtee, and our devoted editor interns, Amy Hattori, Ashton Wang, Kevin Sanchez, Brittany Lopez, Maura Donnelly, Kate Izubova. Yes, there are more. Sophie Weiss.
Have we put them in a cage or something? Because they are multiplying like rabbits.
Sophie Weiss, Avery Peterson, Charles Becker, Gabriel Moraria, Jonah Fiden, and Kevin Theranet. You can find out much more on our website, Cinema Sounds and Secrets, on the films in today's podcast, along with recommendations on where to find films, on great books on cinema, special interviews with filmmakers, and more. And please send us your questions and thoughts at cinemasoundsandsecrets.com. You can find us on all of your favorite streaming services, including Apple Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We hope you enjoyed today's show.
We'll see you here next time at the movies.
You have any idea what you'd have to look forward to if you stayed here? 9 chances out of 10 we'd both wind up at a concentration camp. Isn't that true, Louis?
I'm afraid Major Strasser would insist.
You're saying this only to make me go.
I'm saying it because it's true. Inside of us, we both know you belong with Victor. You're part of his work, the thing that keeps him going. If that plane leaves the ground and you're not with him, you'll regret it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon and for the rest of your life.
But what about us?
We'll always have Paris. We didn't have. We lost it until you came to Casablanca. We got it back last night.
When I said I would never leave you.
And you never will. But I've got a job to do, too. Where I'm going, you can't follow. What I've got to do, you can't be any part of. Ilsa, I'm no good at being noble, but it doesn't take much to see that the problems of 3 little people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world. Someday you'll understand that. No. He's looking at you, kid.